Welcome back. Today's story filled with drama and unexpected turns. Hit like, subscribe, and let's jump in.
Lover's Celebration, April 5th, happened to fall on a Monday this year, and as I arrived at the Homestead Cafe, it was already nearly full. I was seated about 3 minutes before my 6:30 reservation. I handed the waiter my drink order, thanked him, and requested to seat myself. He nodded silently and left 2 menus on my table. I sat with my back to the wall, placing a plain gray Spanish bottle bag on the empty setting across from me and leaning a large green card envelope against it. I had come alone and early. As I looked around the room, I felt a bit claustrophobic, a sensation I hadn't experienced in almost exactly 5 years of pandemic lockdowns, punctuated by brief periods of relaxed regulations. It had been precisely 5 years since I last sat at what was once our favorite table. By regular, I meant we used to book it about once every 6 weeks, always well in advance for our date nights. Tonight, the restaurant was bustling with small 2-person tables fitting for the occasion. But after nearly 5 years of restrictions and social distancing, the room felt more crowded than intimate. I realized I had grown accustomed to isolation, both from the lockdowns and from working alone at home for so long. The waiter returned with a bottle, uncorked it, and poured a sample into a glass for me to taste. After approving, I requested only a half glass before he left me to my thoughts. Out of what must have been 20 to 25 small tables in this part of the restaurant, only 3 or 4 were empty, one of them right next to mine. At a glance, without examining too closely, I thought my table was the only one with a single person sitting at it. I had, of course, booked for 2, and before I even thought that Rachel was running late as usual, I heard the quiet beep from my mobile phone indicating a message received. I pulled it from my blazer pocket and pressed the button to light it up. The time immediately flashed up 18:32. I always use the 24-hour setting on my phone and digital clocks. I've been a freelance feature writer now for almost 11 years, but as a young journalist for 16 years, I was a Maplewood Times man, starting as a copyholder, handling small ads, and being a general gopher. Then I moved up to junior reporter, senior reporter, and sub-editor, mostly on the late afternoon and evening shift. While words and facts are important in newspapers, deadlines are absolutely paramount. As I stroked and tapped the screen to get to my messages, in my peripheral vision, I couldn't help but notice the empty table next to me on the left being occupied. The lady of a happy couple brushed past me in a woolen coat and long forest green dress to get to her seat by the wall, making me smile for only the second time today, not warmly, as I was long past doing that, but it was a chilly April night in our part of the world, and my wife's seat of choice, had she arrived on time, would have been the wall seat where I now sat, comfortably in front of the radiator. No, I didn't smile for Rachel. I hadn't even seen her this morning, as she left for work early for a strategy meeting, apparently. I only smiled for my kids as I dropped them off at school, kissed them, and told them to be on their very best behavior tonight. I wondered if I would be able to do the same. I had arranged for Rachel's parents to pick them up after school and keep them overnight, leaving Rachel and me to celebrate our anniversary without having to worry about Noah and Chloe. As I said, the tables were quite close together, and as the lady passed close by me through the narrow gap, I caught a whiff of her lovely perfume. It smelled nice, rich, and alluring as it first struck the senses but turned light and floral as it lingered long on the palate, a smell that would evoke emotions and could probably delight whoever was with her. Lucky partner, I thought, taking my eyes off my phone screen to glance briefly at the seat diagonally opposite, where the new arrival's partner was to sit. But the seat was empty. I could only see the back of the departing maitre d', Adrian Jr., the fresh-faced son of the owner, hurrying off to welcome the next couple standing at the entrance. It looked like the lovely-smelling lady was waiting on her beau, just as I was waiting on my rather tardy wife, my wife of 11 years exactly to the day. We always came here to this very table, or at least this table position. Sometimes, a different table would be here, as we had requested seating for 4 or 6 with high chairs when needed on special occasions. Although recently, only when regulations allowed. Here is where we had our first date together, where I proposed to Rachel and where she accepted, and where we celebrated all our family birthdays and anniversaries, including today's. The anniversary date was romantic to us for more than one reason. It was also the day we married, on Monday, April 5, 2014, at the local registrar's office. We were both 31 at the time, and Rachel's biological clock was ticking loudly. I didn't know at the time, or at least I didn't realize, that Rachel was already pregnant with our son, Noah. She only told me on our wedding night that she was 2 weeks late for her period, but that hadn't occurred to her until that morning. What with all the stress leading up to the wedding and not having seen me before the ceremony, she postponed passing on the news until we were alone afterward. Not that I wouldn't have done the right thing if it wasn't our wedding night. I had wanted to marry Rachel long before I asked her anyway. We were living together by then, had been a couple for exactly 6 years, and the wedding had been planned for many months. For me at the time, Rachel was the one. She may have been late at that time 11 years ago, but she was often late now. She was definitely late for our 10th wedding anniversary 3 years ago. I was here waiting for her on my own, staring at that brick wall, forewarned by a similar running late message on an older phone. I had hung on, waiting until 8:30 that night, until I had to give up the table, departing with a sense of defeat as I walked away from a room full of romantic couples, feeling like I was making a solitary walk of shame on lovers' celebration. I had insisted on paying the approximate cost of a meal for 2 at the front desk before leaving. Victor, the restaurant owner, was apologetic about asking me to leave, but it was lovers' celebration, and all the tables were booked for the next session. This turned out to be only 4 or 5 weeks before the first lockdown began. I had met Rachel at a mid-January wedding 18 years ago, when we were both about 27. I knew the groom as a college friend, and she had gone to school with the bride. I was working unsociable hours at the newspaper, most nights, from afternoons through to well gone midnight, and I actually had no girlfriend or many opportunities to attract one. Rachel was studying hard to be a lawyer, concentrating on her exams, so she also came alone to the wedding. During our conversations, we discovered we both lived in the same town and commuted to Riverview for work. My weekend, on my shift pattern, was Monday and Friday back then, and she suggested we get together in a couple of weeks, on Friday. We checked our calendars and set the day for April 5th, at this very cafe, where I had never actually eaten before. Rachel explained that she had been a server here during school and college holidays and even weekends before that while still at school. If that date goes well, she told me, we can exchange telephone numbers and take it from there. I only noticed the significance of the date when I got home, then I thought it must have been a joke. A first date on lovers' celebration. Get real. She was a beautiful girl, and I was an ordinary bloke, so she was obviously pulling my leg. I assumed she was just having a bit of fun at my expense and would probably tell the bride when she got back from the honeymoon. She had told me that she'd booked the table, so at least the joke wouldn't cost me. But then, as the date began to loom and was only a few days away, I wondered if there was a possibility that she was genuine. If she was genuinely interested in me, and I left her hanging, my name would be mud with my old college mate, and I'd never have a chance with this stunner again. And if she was stringing me along for a laugh, it would cost me nothing to come along at the right time, and if she didn't show up within, say, 10 minutes, I would bow out, and the restaurant could still cover the table without too much hassle. When I arrived on time and spoke to the maitre d' that evening, asking if there was a reservation for Rachel Turner, I got a, "Certainly, sir, she is waiting for you." And there she was, looking as beautiful as a picture and absolutely good enough to eat. As I mentioned, I have always worked with deadlines and am used to being resourceful and getting things done in a timely manner. I thought a "Be My Valentine" card for a first date would be both tacky and embarrassing for us both, so I had a word with the studio overseer in the print room, and one of the country's leading daily cartoonists knocked out a brilliant cartoon design. The print room color printed me a "Be Yours Next Year's Valentine" card with a caricature of me with heavy chains around my chest, held in place by a huge padlock and a throbbing heart behind all that metal. There was also a caricature of Rachel, her features taken from one of the wedding photos, holding a blazing acetylene torch and an open, hinged welder helmet on her head, captioned, "Unlock my heart, but please don't melt it." She laughed when she opened the envelope and saw the card, signed by "An admirer who wants to get to know you better." We found out quite quickly that we were relaxed with each other, and during the evening, we arranged to date again, then became exclusive. After a couple of months of passionate courting, we moved into my small flat together as a couple. A couple of years later, we committed to each other by exchanging engagement rings, but it was another 3 years before we married and started looking for a family house in our hometown. By then, we were both committed to our careers. I was a sub-editor, as well as writing regular weekend feature articles, and I knew it would be years before I became a fully fledged editor. Once baby Noah was about 2 years old, Rachel wanted to get back to work as a lawyer, specializing in corporate law, so I went freelance, writing and doing the house husband duties. Besides, our youngest, Chloe, was a surprise baby, unplanned but loved equally as much as Noah, and Rachel only had a couple of months with Chloe before returning to work. As far as Chloe is concerned, she is daddy's girl, and I've been father and mother to her all her 5 years of age. Noah is easygoing and resilient in his reliance on family life. Rachel was happy to get back to work immediately after Chloe, eager to earn her junior partnership. More recently, however, Rachel doesn't seem happy with me anymore. Last April, we were in the middle of a lockdown, and everywhere was closed, so we, or rather, I, had Chinese takeaway delivered to our door. I left Rachel's untouched portion in the fridge when I retired to bed alone. Work, she said. The same excuse that even then was getting old. Apparently, as a lawyer specializing in mergers and acquisitions, there's always a vital prospectus to prepare or a fresh takeover rebuttal that needs all the legal minds in the firm to be focused on until the wee small hours, several times a week. This year, I had booked the table from 18:30 through to closing time some weeks before and had already prepaid an estimated bill for up to 4 average a la carte meals and drinks with Victor when I dropped in weeks ago. He protested that it was unnecessary, reminding me that Rachel had waited tables there as a student for 4 years, some 20 years ago, so the leeway between his cafe and my family was somehow justified. But I insisted on paying in advance. I was resigned to this view of the restaurant with my back to the wall, though I could see why it was Rachel's favored seat. It was a good position, even without the benefit of the radiator in a cold winter. You could see everyone coming into this part of the cafe, the bar area beyond, and even the front entrance. All I ever saw from my facing seat was my dinner guest and the brick wall behind them. No wonder my wife made this our favorite table. The message, I remembered to look at the message that had beeped on my mobile. Sorry, hon, still at work. 60 minutes. The message said more to me than words. Even the L and 60 meant fewer key taps devoted to me and more of that precious time on whatever else she was doing in preference. I smiled for only the third time of the day, a smile without humor. I hadn't reminded Rachel this morning of the date and time of the meal, or even mentioned our anniversary since last year. Now I was here, sitting like a lemon, all alone, and Rachel was busy somewhere else, even on Lover's Celebration, the occasion of our 12th wedding anniversary. She had somewhere else to be instead. 12 is the silk anniversary, isn't it? I thought idly. That reminded me that the woman sitting at the table next to me wore a silk dress in forest green. I could still faintly smell her perfume, or maybe just the memory of it. It was nothing like any of the ones my wife had preferred down the years. Different tastes lead to different choices, I suppose. I wondered idly if the woman in green, temporarily sitting alone, was here celebrating a similar anniversary on a date with her boyfriend, husband, or lover, or if she simply favored green tonight over whatever else was in her wardrobe. I had little appetite this night, but I put my mobile phone down on the table and picked up the menu. I thought I would try a starter, if only to soak up the odd couple of sips I'd taken from the half glass of wine that I had the waiter pour me from Rachel's favorite bottle of Castillo Reserva. It wasn't my usual tipple, but I wasn't in the mood for anything more substantial. Maybe later at home, I'd make a sandwich and maybe have a beer. Looks like we've both been stood up, came the husky female voice from the table next to me, slightly louder than the background chat, so it invaded my cold veil of solitude like a hot knife. I looked up and around to my left. Although the lighting was low, neither my candle nor hers was yet lit. Her open face, dark brown eyes, and soft dark wavy hair down to her shoulders, framing her face, made her a true beauty. Sorry, I said, I was miles away. Was that wishful thinking? She asked softly. Now that she had my attention, a small smile hovered uncertainly but invitingly on her lips, drawing me into a conversation. Maybe, I shrugged. I glanced momentarily at my phone and back to her again. She's still at work, she says. Running late, she says. I'm not so sure if she'll even make it tonight. Last time, I hesitated, thinking it was too much information for a stranger who was probably looking forward to a nice romantic dinner more than I was. Then I thought, to hell with it. I had bottled this up for too long. Last time, she never made it at all. Last time, what, last week or whenever, she asked. Last year, I corrected. No, sorry, not last year. Actually, 5 years ago. You know, back before everything changed. This day, 3 years ago, was our 10th. This year, tonight is another anniversary, our 12th. Blimey. 12. That's silk, isn't it? Silk as in a silk scarf or maybe silk pajamas, she mused with a sad smile, probably full of some of her own unhappy memories. Comfort fabric, I said, something soft and warm when things aren't going so well, like a comfort blanket. Or a silk handkerchief, she added with a knowing smile, for drying tears. Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. That's all right, I said. I guess she's otherwise occupied tonight. What is she, a doctor or a nurse? She asked. For some professions, their work is vitally important, and staffing can be an issue. Sometimes, the relief shift can't come in, and those left behind have to keep everything going. You know, life or death situations can be more important even than a date. No, she's a lawyer, I replied. Oh, she said, raising an eyebrow. A lawyer, huh? Well, they have their own emergencies, I suppose. Yeah, emergencies, I said, making light of it with a smile and a shrug. She made junior partner 3 years ago, and well, the workload absolutely took off, or so she tells me. The woman next to me was young and beautiful, clearly looking forward to a night out, probably not expecting to hear about my problems. I wasn't looking to unload on her, but mentally preparing myself for the idea that I might have to move on to the next stage. Well, she countered, at least she's not a school principal. Imagine being responsible for all those kids and staff. Oh, is that what you are? I asked. Sort of, she said. I run a daycare center. I'm the proprietor, or should that be proprietress, of a place for preschoolers. It's called Little Sprouts Learning Center. Preschool. Not as bad as a secondary school principal, then, I said. You've probably got lots of sweet little kids, age 2 to 5, I'd guess. A nice age for children, if I remember correctly. True, they are sweet, she replied, but we start with toddlers as young as 18 months. I have a great team that loves working with the little ones. She laughed, more to herself than anything. I must admit, I do love the lit lies too. Sometimes, I hate handing some of them back to their parents at the end of the day. Oh, God, I said. I remember the terrible twos all too well. Noah wasn't so bad, but Chloe was a handful. She always needed her mom, and Rachel was working hard to secure the junior partnership when Chloe needed her at home. They're not so bad, she laughed. At least we can hand the troublesome few back at the end of the day. We always make sure they sit quietly for a snack, then lunch, and then they get their heads down for quiet time. They do mostly drop off, even if just for a little while. So you can get the kettle on, then? I said. Absolutely, she replied. Tea and biscuits for the staff. Essential me time. She laughed again. So, I take it you have young children too? I asked. Not anymore, unfortunately, she said, her smile fading slightly. My daughter is 16 now. But I do enjoy working with the little ones at the daycare. It keeps me busy. The phone beeped again. Excuse me, I just want to get this message, I said, picking up the phone. The time read 18:55. Rachel had sent another message, sorry, Han, more or less to file. Getting Thai takeout. VL9. I turned to the woman. Rachel, that's my wife of 11 years, she's not going to make it tonight. And she's already ordered Thai for herself at work. Oh, that's a shame, the woman said sympathetically. You got her a card, and is that a bottle? Well, it's a special occasion, I said. We missed each other this morning in passing. It's not a bottle in the bag, actually, it's a novelty storage tin. Looks like a 1960s tin of peaches, but it's empty and has a removable lid. You can use it for keeping little things in. Comes as a set of 6. I only brought one along to present to her. Oh, that's a nice idea, she said, smiling. It fits perfectly with the silk anniversary theme. Thoughtful. I thought so, I replied, realizing I had been prattling on. Sorry, I'm being rude. My name's Nathan, I said, holding out my hand with a sheepish smile. The tables were so close together that she didn't even need to lean across to gently shake my hand. She smiled much more enthusiastically than I could ever do. I'm Grace, she said, but you can call me Grace. She giggled. Sorry, couldn't resist. When you said, My friends call me Nathan. I laughed with her. Well, my birth name is Nathanson. My mom named me after her favorite actor, but I've always gone by Nathan. I see, she said. By explanation, I'm really Grace, but I like it. And it goes well with my married name, Grace Collins, even though I'm not exactly married anymore. I kept the name after I divorced. Was he blind or simply stupid? I blurted out without thinking. Stupid, definitely, she replied without missing a beat. He cheated and thought he could get away with it. The pompous idiot. She gave a small shrug. I'm over it now, though. It's been nearly 5 years. I can't stand cheaters, I said. If a relationship isn't working, at least have the honesty to end it before moving on. Exactly, she said, nodding. But he was definitely stupid. She grinned at me, showing a dimple on her left cheek. We chatted for a while, sharing stories about our lives and families, the conversation flowing easily between us. It turned out that Grace had been divorced for almost 5 years now, with a daughter, Madison, who was in her junior year of high school. I told her a bit about Noah and Chloe and how I had taken on a freelance writing career to be home with them more often. As we spoke, I noticed that the restaurant was still buzzing, with waiters gliding between tables carrying plates of food. The smell of roasted meat and aromatic sauces filled the air. I had almost forgotten that I was supposed to be here for an anniversary dinner, and for the first time in a while, I felt relaxed. My phone was silent. No more messages from Rachel. I sighed inwardly, then turned my attention back to Grace, who was talking about her passion for running the daycare and how rewarding it was to help shape young children's lives. Look, Nathan, Grace said, interrupting herself as she glanced at the clock on her phone. I know you were going to have a starter, and I'm absolutely starving. My first time out on a date in years, and I couldn't eat a thing all day. I was too nervous. Well, I said, feeling a spark of something that hadn't been there all evening, I'm still here, and the food is supposed to be excellent. If you're hungry, would you like to share this table with me? We could leave the other one free for a couple who might otherwise be turned away. Grace smiled warmly. That sounds like a lovely idea. After all, tonight is for lovers, or at least for good company. Great, I said, moving the tin and envelope from the place setting opposite me to the floor beside my chair, out of the way. Why don't you join me over here? If Rachel does show up, you'll give me a heads up, and I'll be prepared. Grace laughed lightly, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight. I'd be happy to. And don't worry, I'm sure we can avoid any dramatic scenes. She stood up, signaling to Daniel, the maitre d', who noticed us and nodded in acknowledgement. He moved swiftly to seat a couple that had just arrived at the door, leading them to Grace's now vacant table. I watched as Grace took off her coat and draped it over her chair before settling herself across from me. As she sat down, I poured her a glass of wine from the bottle I had opened earlier, and topped off my own glass. She thanked me with a smile, and we both took a sip, letting the warmth of the wine calm us. So, Nathan, she said, setting her glass down, what do you think we should order? I used to work in the kitchen here while I was in college, so I know a few of the chef's specialties. That's a great insider tip, I replied. I'd say you should pick the starter. I trust your judgment. She looked over the menu thoughtfully. How about the mushroom risotto to start? It's one of the best dishes here. Creamy, rich, but not too heavy. Sounds perfect, I said, signaling to Daniel to take our order. As he came over, Grace placed the order for the risotto, and we both decided on the pan-seared salmon for the main course. With the order placed, we continued chatting, the conversation effortlessly shifting between our careers, families, and various interests. So, your kids, Noah and Chloe, Grace began. It sounds like you've been really hands-on with them. Yeah, I have, I said. It wasn't the original plan, but when Chloe was born and Rachel was so focused on her career, it just made sense for me to work from home. It's been challenging, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. They're amazing kids. That's wonderful, Grace replied. Madison was only 11 when I got divorced. I had to juggle a lot back then, trying to get the daycare up and running while being there for her. But she's been my rock, really. I'm so proud of the young woman she's becoming. I can imagine, I said. Teenagers can be tricky, but it sounds like you're doing an amazing job. We paused as the waiter brought the risotto to our table. The aroma was enticing, and I felt my appetite awaken for the first time that evening. We each took a bite, and Grace was right, the dish was delicious. As we ate, the restaurant grew busier, the atmosphere buzzing with energy. I noticed the older couple who had taken Grace's previous table. They seemed happy, smiling and laughing together. It made me think about how different things were from what I had expected tonight. Funny how life takes us in directions we never saw coming, I mused aloud. Tell me about it, Grace agreed. 5 years ago, I thought I'd still be married, raising my daughter with my husband by my side. But things change. Sometimes for the better, even if it doesn't feel that way at first. I suppose you're right, I said. When I look back, I can see all the signs. But at the time, I just didn't want to face them. Grace looked at me sympathetically. It sounds like you've been carrying a lot on your own, Nathan. I shrugged. I just never imagined it would get to this point. Even tonight, a part of me thought Rachel might show up, and things would somehow go back to how they used to be. She reached across the table and placed a hand over mine. I know it's hard, but sometimes, letting go is the only way to move forward. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. You're right. It's difficult to let go of something you thought was forever. We both fell silent for a moment, and then I cleared my throat. But enough about me. What about you? Any plans to get back into the dating scene, or are you just focusing on work and Madison? Grace laughed softly. Well, tonight was supposed to be my first step back into dating, but you can see how that turned out. She gestured around the room with a playful smile. His loss, I said sincerely. You're great company, Grace. I'm glad we ended up at the same place tonight. Thanks, Nathan, she replied, her eyes meeting mine. I'm glad too. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed a conversation this much. The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. The salmon arrived, perfectly cooked, and we shared a decadent chocolate dessert afterward. As the night wore on, I found myself growing more comfortable, almost forgetting why I had originally come to the restaurant. Eventually, the time came to settle the bill. I reached for my wallet, but Grace stopped me. No way, you've already been more than generous. Let me at least split it with you. I shook my head. Absolutely not. You're my guest, and I'd like to treat you. She hesitated, then relented with a grateful smile. All right, if you insist. But next time, dinner's on me. Next time, huh? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Why not, she replied, her eyes twinkling. After all, you still owe me that birthday dinner in July, remember? How could I forget? I said, smiling back at her. July 23rd. It's already marked on my calendar. As we gathered our coats and prepared to leave, I walked Grace to her car. The night air was crisp, and the stars were beginning to peek through the clouds. We paused by her car, and she turned to face me. Thank you for tonight, Nathan. It was unexpectedly wonderful, she said, her voice soft. Thank you, Grace. I enjoyed it too. More than I thought I would, I admitted. We stood there for a moment, the air between us charged with an unspoken possibility. I wasn't sure what would happen next, if there would be a next time, or if this was just one perfect evening. But as she leaned in and gave me a gentle kiss on the cheek, I felt something shift, a new beginning starting to take shape. Good night, Nathan, she whispered. Good night, Grace, I replied, watching as she got into her car and drove away. As I walked to my own car, I couldn't help but think that lovers' celebration hadn't turned out the way I'd planned. But sometimes, life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. As I walked back to my car, I felt an unexpected lightness in my step. The evening had turned out so differently than I had imagined. What began as a lonely anniversary dinner had transformed into a night of pleasant conversation, unexpected laughter, and a glimmer of hope for something new. I hadn't even thought about checking my phone again, it was still tucked away in my pocket, forgotten for the first time in a long while. I reached my car, took a deep breath, and fished the keys from my coat pocket. Before I could unlock the door, the phone buzzed, vibrating against my side. I hesitated, suddenly not sure I wanted to read another message from Rachel, but curiosity won out. I pulled out the phone and glanced at the screen. A text from her. Nathan, I came by the restaurant earlier. Saw you with someone. I went home. We need to talk. My heart sank, and the hopeful feeling that had just begun to blossom felt like it was withering away. I leaned against the car, the cold metal pressing through my coat, and reread the message. It was brief but heavy, with layers of implication. It wasn't what I wanted to deal with right now, not after such an unexpectedly pleasant evening. But I knew I couldn't ignore it, either. I took a deep breath and typed a reply, "We can talk tomorrow. I'll be home later." Hitting send, I slipped the phone back into my pocket, trying to focus on the feeling of hope that Grace had sparked in me rather than the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead. I got into the car, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot, my thoughts a tangled mix of the evening's events and the unknowns waiting for me at home. The drive was quiet, the roads nearly empty at this hour. As I made my way toward our house, I thought back to my conversation with Grace, about letting go and moving forward. For years, I had been trying to hold on to what Rachel and I once had, hoping that if I was patient and understanding enough, things would somehow fall back into place. But maybe that had been the wrong approach. Maybe the truth was that I needed to finally face the reality of our situation and make some difficult decisions. I pulled into the driveway and noticed that the house was dark, except for a faint light coming from the living room. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, the engine idling as I gathered my thoughts. Finally, I turned off the ignition and made my way inside. The door creaked as I opened it, and I was met by silence. I hung up my coat, slipped off my shoes, and walked toward the living room. Rachel was there, sitting on the couch, her posture tense and her arms crossed. The only light in the room came from a small table lamp beside her, casting a dim glow across her face. "You're home," she said, her voice flat. "I am," I replied, taking a few steps into the room but keeping some distance between us. "You said we needed to talk." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. "I came to the restaurant," she said. "I was going to surprise you, but then I saw you with that woman." "Who is she, Nathan?" I took a deep breath. "Her name is Grace. We met at the restaurant. She was supposed to be on a date, but her plans fell through, just like ours did. We ended up talking and sharing a meal. That's all." "That's all," she repeated, a trace of bitterness in her tone. "You looked pretty cozy for it to be just a random meal." I resisted the urge to get defensive. "Rachel, I waited for you for over an hour. I didn't even know if you'd show up, and when you texted that you were staying at work and getting takeout, I didn't think I'd care, did you?" she interrupted. "You didn't think I'd mind if you spent our anniversary with someone else?" I shook my head, struggling to keep my voice calm. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't about trying to hurt you. But, Rachel, we've been drifting apart for a long time. You know that as well as I do." She stood up, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. "And what? You've given up now, is that it? You're ready to just walk away?" The frustration I had been suppressing all night rose to the surface. "You've been walking away for years, Rachel," I snapped. "You've put your career ahead of everything, our marriage, the kids, everything. I've been patient. I've tried to understand. But I'm exhausted, and I'm tired of feeling like I'm the only one who still cares." Her expression faltered, a mix of anger and hurt flashing in her eyes. "That's not fair, Nathan. You don't know what it's been like for me, the pressure, the expectations. I didn't choose my career over you or the kids. I was just trying to keep things together." "Well, it hasn't worked," I replied softly. "We're not together anymore, not in any meaningful way. I don't know if we can fix this, and honestly, I don't know if I want to try anymore." Rachel took a step back, as if I had physically struck her. The room seemed to grow colder, the silence stretching out uncomfortably. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she let out a shaky breath. "Do you want a divorce?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I closed my eyes, trying to find the right words. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what I want, or what would be best for us or the kids. But I do know that something has to change." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the floor. "We'll talk more in the morning," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. I sank onto the couch and rubbed my face with my hands. The conversation had been painful, but it was necessary. For the first time in years, I felt like I had spoken honestly, like I had allowed myself to admit that our marriage was on the brink. It was a step, though I wasn't sure if it was one toward reconciliation or separation. As I sat there in the quiet, I thought about Grace again. Her words echoed in my mind. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to move forward. I didn't know what lay ahead for me, for Rachel, or for our children, but I did know that I needed to find a path toward happiness, even if it meant letting go of what I once believed would last forever. With that thought, I got up from the couch and headed to bed, the weight of the day slowly lifting. Tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations and uncertain choices, but for now, I would rest. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I found myself wondering if perhaps lovers' celebration had indeed been the start of something new. The next morning arrived slowly, the first hints of daylight seeping through the curtains. I woke up with a dull ache in my chest, the weight of the previous night's conversation with Rachel still pressing down on me. As much as I had dreaded the confrontation, a small part of me felt a strange sense of relief that the tension was finally out in the open. I got up, showered, and dressed quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone. As I made my way downstairs, I could hear the faint murmur of voices coming from the kitchen. Rachel was already up, speaking softly with the kids. I paused outside the door, listening to Noah's cheerful chatter and Chloe's giggle. Their voices were a reminder of what was at stake. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and walked in. The kids were seated at the breakfast table, and Rachel stood at the counter, making coffee. She glanced up when she saw me, her expression guarded. "Morning, Dad." Noah called out, his face lighting up when he saw me. "We're having pancakes. Mom let us help mix the batter." "Yeah, I made the best ones." Chloe chimed in, holding up a pancake with a lumpy shape. "See. That looks great, sweetie," I said, giving her a quick smile. "Good job, both of you." I glanced at Rachel, who was pouring coffee into 2 mugs. She held one out to me, a small gesture of peace. "Coffee?" she asked softly. "Thanks," I said, taking the mug from her. We stood there for a moment, an unspoken truce lingering between us as the kids continued eating. It was a temporary reprieve, but we both knew we needed to finish the conversation we had started last night. Once breakfast was over and the kids were occupied with cartoons in the living room, Rachel and I returned to the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and I could tell she was preparing herself for whatever was coming. "So, about last night," she began, her voice tentative. "I know things haven't been good between us for a while. But I don't want to make any rash decisions, Nathan. I don't think either of us does." I nodded. "I agree. But we need to be honest about where we are. We can't just keep going like this, pretending that everything is fine." She looked down, her fingers tapping lightly against the counter. "I'm willing to try counseling. Couples therapy. I know we've talked about it before, but I think it's worth giving it a real shot." I hadn't expected her to suggest therapy again. The last time it had come up, we both dismissed the idea, thinking it wouldn't change anything. "If we're going to do this, it has to be for the right reasons," I said. "Not just to put a band-aid on things. It has to be about figuring out if we can rebuild what we had, or if it's time to let go." "I know," she replied quietly. "I know I haven't been the best partner. I've let work consume me, and I've taken you for granted. But I do still care about you, Nathan. And about us." Her admission caught me off guard. It had been so long since she'd said anything that vulnerable, anything that hinted at regret or a willingness to change. Part of me wanted to believe that this could be a turning point, but another part was still cautious, wary of false hope. "Okay," I said finally. "I'm willing to give it a shot. But we have to be all in, Rachel. We need to be honest and face whatever comes up, even if it's uncomfortable." She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. "Agreed. I'll find a therapist who can fit us in as soon as possible." "Good," I replied, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. "We'll take it one step at a time." With the decision made, we fell into an uneasy silence. There was a lot left unsaid, but at least we had a plan, a direction to move in. It was more than we'd had for a long time. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Warren. The sessions were difficult, often leaving me emotionally drained, but they forced us to confront the underlying issues in our marriage. We talked about the growing distance between us, the resentment that had built up over the years, and how our priorities had shifted. There were no quick fixes, and some days felt like we were just scratching the surface of deeper problems. But there were moments, however small, where we managed to reconnect. One evening after a particularly intense session, Rachel suggested we take a walk together in the park near our house. It was a rare warm evening for early spring, and we strolled in companionable silence for a while before Rachel spoke. "Nathan, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how we can't keep pretending everything is fine," she began. "I realize now how much I've shut you out, and I'm sorry. I didn't want to face the fact that I was losing you." I was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. It hasn't been easy for either of us. But I'm not sure if an apology is enough to fix things. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm trying, Nathan. I'm really trying. And I want you to know that I'm here for this, for us. I don't want to lose you." I appreciated her openness, but part of me wondered if it was too little, too late. I was still uncertain about whether our marriage could fully heal, or if these efforts would only postpone the inevitable. I decided to be honest about that. "I'm still not sure where this is going," I said. "But I'm here too, Rachel. I'm here, and I'm trying." We continued walking, our footsteps echoing along the quiet path. The park was almost empty at this hour, just a few scattered joggers and dog walkers. It was peaceful, a contrast to the emotional turmoil we were navigating. For the first time in months, there was a sense of tentative hope between us, fragile but present. Meanwhile, Grace and I had kept in touch sporadically. After that night at the restaurant, she sent me a text a few days later, just to check in. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a friendly, "Hope you're doing okay." I appreciated the gesture, and we exchanged a few messages here and there, but I kept it casual, not wanting to complicate things while I was still working on my marriage. As summer approached, Grace's birthday drew closer. I hadn't forgotten about our conversation at the restaurant when she had joked about marking the date in my calendar. I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to reach out, but I found myself thinking about her more and more, wondering how she was doing. On July 23rd, I decided to send her a simple message: "Happy birthday, Grace. I hope you have a wonderful day." She replied a few hours later, "Thank you, Nathan. That means a lot. I wasn't sure if you'd remember." "How could I forget?" I texted back. "You made quite the impression." For a moment, I hesitated before sending the next message. "I know things have been a bit complicated, but I'd still like to take you out for that birthday dinner. No pressure, just as friends." Grace's reply came quickly, "I'd like that. As friends." As I put the phone down, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and guilt. I wasn't sure what the dinner would mean or where things would go from there, but I did know that I genuinely enjoyed Grace's company. And for now, that was enough. The weeks leading up to dinner with Grace passed by slowly, marked by more therapy sessions and the continuous effort Rachel and I made to bridge the gap between us. The counseling had helped us communicate better, and some small progress was made. There were good days when we laughed together or had a meaningful conversation, and bad days when old wounds were reopened, and tensions flared. I didn't know what would ultimately come of all this work, but I was determined to give it a real chance. Still, the thought of seeing Grace again brought with it a sense of anticipation that I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was just dinner between friends, after all, that's what we had agreed on, but deep down, I knew there was something more to it. There was a connection between us that I couldn't deny, and even if it wasn't fully clear where that connection would lead, I was curious to find out. On the evening of July 23rd, I left the house just after 6, telling Rachel I was meeting up with an old friend for dinner. It wasn't a lie, but I knew it wasn't the full truth, either. Rachel had nodded absently, distracted by some work emails on her laptop, and I felt a pang of guilt. But I reassured myself that this dinner with Grace didn't mean I was betraying Rachel. I was simply trying to figure out my own path forward, just as much for my sake as for my family's. I arrived at the restaurant, different from the one where we first met, about 10 minutes early. It was a small, cozy place with a warm atmosphere, located in a quiet part of town. I had chosen it deliberately, hoping the low-key setting would make for a relaxed evening. I was led to a table near the window, where the last rays of the setting sun spilled in, casting a soft glow across the room. A few minutes later, I saw Grace walk in. She was wearing a light blue dress that complemented her eyes, and her hair was loosely styled in soft waves. She spotted me and smiled, and as she approached, I stood up to greet her. "Happy birthday, Grace," I said, leaning in for a friendly hug. She smelled faintly of lavender, a scent that immediately put me at ease. "Thank you, Nathan," she replied, her smile warm. "It's really nice to see you again." We sat down, and I poured us each a glass of water from the carafe on the table. For a moment, there was a hint of awkwardness, as if we were trying to find our footing in this unfamiliar territory. But then Grace spoke, her tone light and playful. "So, you remembered my birthday. You didn't have to do this, you know." I chuckled. "I wanted to. And I figured you deserved at least one nice dinner out for your birthday." "Well, I'm glad you did," she said, her expression softening. "It's been a while since I've celebrated my birthday with anyone other than my daughter or my parents." "How's Madison doing?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I remember you said she was starting to think about college applications." "She's doing great," Grace replied. "It's a bit overwhelming for her, with all the choices and decisions, but she's got a good head on her shoulders. I'm proud of how she's handling it." "Sounds like she takes after her mom," I said, and Grace's cheeks flushed slightly. "Thanks, Nathan," she said. "And how are Noah and Chloe? I know you've had a lot going on." "They're doing well," I replied. "Noah's getting into soccer, and Chloe just started piano lessons. Keeps me on my toes." We continued to talk about our kids, our work, and life in general. The conversation flowed effortlessly, just as it had the first time we met. There was a comfort in being around Grace, a feeling that I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was different from what I shared with Rachel, it was uncomplicated and refreshing. I found myself laughing more than I had in months, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't worried about what might happen next. After we ordered our food, Grace looked at me thoughtfully. "So, Nathan," she said, her tone serious for the first time that evening, "how are things really going with you? I mean, beyond the small talk." I hesitated, then took a sip of my water. "It's been tough," I admitted. "Rachel and I are trying counseling, and we're making some progress, I guess. But there's still a lot of uncertainty. I don't know if we're really going to make it, or if we're just delaying the inevitable." Grace nodded, her gaze steady. "It's good that you're giving it an honest effort. At least you'll know you tried everything, whatever the outcome." "Yeah," I said, sighing. "That's what I keep telling myself. I don't want to let the kids down. I don't want to let myself down, either." "You're not letting anyone down by being honest about your feelings," she said gently. "Sometimes, relationships reach a point where they can't be repaired, no matter how much effort you put in. It doesn't mean you failed." Her words resonated with me, striking a chord deep inside. I had been so focused on trying to hold everything together that I hadn't allowed myself to consider that maybe it wasn't about success or failure, maybe it was just about finding peace, whatever form that took. The food arrived, and we shifted back to lighter topics as we ate. We talked about places we'd traveled to and places we still wanted to visit. Grace told me about a hiking trip she'd taken with Madison, and I shared a funny story about taking the kids camping and how Noah insisted on bringing along a portable game console, despite my best efforts to encourage real outdoor fun. As dessert was served, Grace glanced at me with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something personal, Nathan?" "Of course," I said, curious. "That night we first met," she began, "when I saw you sitting there alone, I remember thinking you looked lost. Not just in the sense of waiting for someone who didn't show up, but like you were stuck in some kind of limbo. Do you still feel that way?" I paused, taking a moment to think about my answer. "In some ways, yes," I admitted. "But not as much as I did back then. Meeting you, talking to you that night, it was a reminder that there's more to life than just going through the motions. It gave me a glimpse of what it feels like to actually be present." Grace's eyes softened, and she reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. I'm glad to hear that, she said quietly. Because you deserve to feel alive, Nathan. We all do. We stayed at the restaurant for a little while longer, finishing our drinks and savoring the atmosphere. There was no rush to leave, no pressure to define what was happening between us. It was just a night shared between two people, one that felt genuine and meaningful. As we stood outside the restaurant, I looked at Grace, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Thank you for tonight, I said. It was exactly what I needed. Me too, she replied. And who knows, maybe we can do it again sometime, under less complicated circumstances. I smiled. I'd like that. We hugged, and it felt like a quiet promise, a promise to be kind to ourselves and to each other, regardless of what came next. As Grace got into her car and drove away, I watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner. I was left standing in the warm summer night, feeling a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. When I finally made my way back to my car, I sat there for a moment, reflecting on the evening. I still didn't know what the future held for Rachel and me, or for Grace and me, for that matter. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to face whatever lay ahead. There was hope, and I was ready to embrace it. Over the following weeks, life seemed to settle into a new rhythm. Rachel and I continued with therapy, navigating the ups and downs of our relationship. Some sessions brought us closer, allowing us to understand each other's frustrations and disappointments. But others left us drained and more uncertain than ever. We were still struggling to find common ground, to reconnect in a way that felt genuine. The process was slow and often exhausting, but we pushed through, knowing that whatever happened, we needed to give our marriage a fair shot. Meanwhile, Grace and I stayed in touch, keeping things friendly and casual. We met up a few more times for coffee or lunch, always under the pretext of catching up as friends. Each time we saw each other, there was an unspoken understanding that we were treading carefully. I was still working on my marriage, and Grace was respectful of that. But I couldn't deny that I felt a sense of ease and comfort with her that seemed to come effortlessly, in contrast to the strained efforts Rachel and I were making. One evening, after another challenging therapy session, Rachel and I sat at the kitchen table, the silence between us heavy. We had been discussing the possibility of taking a break from each other, a concept that our therapist had introduced to give us time to reflect on our needs individually. I could see the uncertainty in Rachel's eyes, the same uncertainty I felt within myself. "Do you think a break would help us?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost defeated. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I feel like we've been trying so hard, but we're still in the same place. Maybe some time apart would give us a chance to gain some clarity." Rachel nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "And what if we find out that we're better off apart?" she said, her tone almost a whisper. "What then, Nathan?" The question hung in the air, and I didn't have a ready answer. I reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Then at least we'll know," I said. "We'll know that we tried everything and made the right decision for ourselves and for the kids." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded in agreement. "Okay," she said. "Let's give it a try. Just a temporary break, to see if we can get some perspective." We agreed that I would stay with a friend for a few weeks, allowing us both the space to reflect. I packed a few bags that night, not knowing how to feel about this decision. It wasn't quite a separation, but it wasn't exactly a step toward reconciliation either. It felt like a pause, a chance to catch our breath and figure out what we wanted next. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur. I moved into my friend Tom's spare room, grateful for his support and understanding. He had gone through a divorce a few years earlier and knew the toll it could take, offering me a listening ear whenever I needed to talk. During this time, I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy with Noah and Chloe. I spent as much time with them as possible, picking them up from school, taking them to soccer games and piano lessons, and trying to keep things consistent for their sake. They asked questions about why I wasn't staying at home, and I did my best to explain it in a way that made sense to them without causing unnecessary worry. Rachel and I spoke occasionally, mainly about logistics for the kids. The conversations were cordial but lacked the warmth of a shared life. The distance between us felt real, tangible in a way that was both freeing and frightening. In the midst of it all, I found myself thinking about Grace more often. We hadn't seen each other since her birthday dinner, and I had kept my distance, knowing it wouldn't be fair to involve her in my mess. But one evening, as I sat in Tom's living room staring blankly at the TV, I felt an urge to reach out to her, to hear a familiar voice that had no ties to the strain of my marriage. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. I hesitated for a moment, then typed out a message, "Hey, Grace. It's been a while. How have you been?" She replied almost immediately, "Hey, Nathan. I'm doing well, thanks. I've been meaning to reach out but didn't want to intrude. How are you?" "I'm okay," I wrote back. "Just taking things one day at a time. I'd love to catch up if you're free." "I'd like that," she replied. "How about this weekend? We could go for a hike or grab a coffee." We made plans to meet at a nearby hiking trail on Saturday morning. It was a place I had taken the kids a few times, with easy paths winding through the woods. I liked the idea of being out in nature, where the conversation could flow naturally, without the pressures of a more formal setting. Saturday arrived, and the day was perfect for a hike, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze rustling the trees. I parked my car and saw Grace already waiting at the trailhead, dressed in a casual athletic outfit with a light backpack slung over one shoulder. She waved when she saw me, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and happiness at seeing her again. "Hey, Nathan," she said, her smile genuine. "You ready to hit the trail?" "I am," I replied, feeling more at ease than I had in days. "Lead the way." We started walking, the dirt path crunching softly under our shoes. For a while, we didn't talk much, simply enjoying the fresh air and the peaceful surroundings. After some time, Grace broke the silence. "So, how are things really going?" she asked, glancing over at me. "It's complicated," I said, not sure where to start. "Rachel and I decided to take a break, just to figure things out. We've been working on our marriage for months now, but it still feels like we're stuck. I don't know if it's going to work." Grace listened intently, nodding as I spoke. "That sounds hard, Nathan. I can't imagine what it's like, especially with the kids involved." "Yeah, it's been rough," I admitted. "I just feel like I'm in limbo, trying to decide whether to keep fighting for something that feels like it's slipping away, or to let it go and start over." Grace paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I know I've said this before, but there's no shame in deciding to move on if that's what feels right. Sometimes, letting go is the bravest thing you can do." Her words hung in the air, resonating with me. We continued walking, the conversation shifting back and forth between serious topics and lighthearted banter. It felt easy with Grace, like I didn't have to pretend or put on a brave face. There was a freedom in being with her, even if I wasn't sure where this connection was heading. As we reached a scenic overlook, we stopped to catch our breath. The view stretched out before us, a vast expanse of forest and hills, with the distant sound of a river flowing below. "It's beautiful up here," Grace said, leaning against the wooden railing. "It is," I agreed, standing beside her. I haven't felt this relaxed in a long time. We stood there in comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't demand words. I could feel a subtle shift in the air between us, as if something unspoken was lingering just beneath the surface. I turned to look at Grace, and she met my gaze, her eyes reflecting a mixture of understanding and something deeper. "Grace," I began, not entirely sure what I was about to say. Before I could finish, she reached out and took my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a quiet acknowledgement of everything we hadn't said. I didn't know what the future held for us, or for my marriage, but standing there with Grace, hand in hand, I felt a sense of clarity that had been eluding me for months. We stayed there for a while longer, not needing to define what was happening, content to just be in that moment. As we eventually made our way back down the trail, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something new, or simply the start of a long goodbye to the life I had once known. Thanks for watching. Should Nathan save his marriage or pursue Grace? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.